way back, it might be, it could be, it is. Holy cow! Welcome to another broadcast of Bricks Behind the Ivy.
Hey, Cub fans, welcome to another episode of Bricks Behind the Ivy. Thank you so much to our awesome sponsors, Wrigleyville Sports, the best sports store in Wrigleyville, and Yaggy Road Roasting Company, based in Valparaiso, Indiana, serving cups of coffee just as special as the moments you drink them in.
Hello, welcome to Bricks Behind the Ivy.
Hey, Brickheads, it's Candid Cubs, aka Jeff Rogowskis, with another episode of Bricks Behind the Ivy, brought to you by our amazing sponsors, Yaggy Road Roasting Company and Wrigleyville Sports, the best Cubs sports store in Wrigleyville. Today, we are continuing our series on the NL Central preview, and today joining me is Jeremy May from Prospects 1500, talking about the St. Louis Cardinals, which, yes, don't boo. I know Cub fans have a lot of animosity, but Jeremy, thank you so much for coming on a Cubs podcast to talk Cardinals with me.
Hey, man, no worries at all. I've got a lot of close friends that are Cubs fans, so it's a heated rivalry, but it's a fun one. So I'm glad to be on here.
Yeah, we were talking a little bit before recording about, my experience with the Cardinals of really coming from a frame of jealousy, and really, it's not a rivalry when your rival kicks your butt most of your life. So it's, I think, Cub fans have so many different nomenclature for Cardinal Devil Magic, and the ability that you guys have had to sustain success for as long as you have, at least in, my fandom, which is, going on 30 years in the sport. But thank you so much for joining us. We're not going to bury the lead. Let's talk some St. Louis Cardinals and what they did this offseason and what's changed. So let's start there. I think, it has been pretty widely publicized that there hasn't been a lot of changes to this roster. There was a lot of noise about different trades and looking to offload contracts. Seems like it's going to be a weird transition period for the Cardinals. What's changed for the 2025 squad?
I mean, you hit it, not much. You saw Lance Lynn and Kyle Gibson, some starting pitching guys leave through free agency. Paul Goldschmidt, opted not to re-sign him. He's now going to swing for the Yankees. But what did they bring in? Nothing. Nothing to replace that from the major league level. I mean, they did some minor roster moves. Jose Barrero, Ryan Velotti, those guys make no dent in your roster. They probably don't even make the team out of spring. They did just sign Phil Maton, relief pitcher, I think last week, or maybe the tail end of the week before. That's kind of a late signing, but that's, again, he just kind of goes into your bullpen to give you innings. Nothing, super substantial there. But I mean, the biggest change the Cardinals are going through right now is more in the front office with a Chaim Bloom kind of coming into his reign and Mozeliak coming out of his reign. And so, again, I think that's where that 1 year weird window is. I think we're kind of in that now. So you're in the lame duck for Mozeliak, and you're seeing it on the roster. I think it's just kind of like an in-between year. So, as far as movement, there hasn't been much.
Yeah, I think, as a Cubs fan, that I'm Bloom hiring really, triggered my radar of concern of the return of the big red machine, which is actually the Reds. I'm sorry, Reds fans, but he did a lot of great work with the Rays, and found himself in Boston with I think a much more challenging situation, and I think the market size plays to Bloom's strengths. And I am definitely nervous about what he's going to bring to the organization. As a Cubs fan, I'm sure you're pretty excited. What do you think of the Bloom hiring?
I like it. You mentioned that I work with Prospects 1500, and so we focus a lot on the minor leagues with Prospects 1500, and so I love the Cardinals. I've been a Cardinals fan my entire life, but I kind of look at the minor leagues, and ironic that I'm on a Cubs podcast because I have envy of your guys' minor league system. But I think that's where you're going to see the biggest impact of Chaim Bloom first is on the minor leagues and kind of changing some of the development process. And, last year's draft, I think we already saw a slightly different way of going about things. And And so I think that's to me, that's the most exciting, because that's where you're going to see your sustained growth, right? Is to revamp some of those minor leagues and then keep the pipeline coming, because that was the Cardinal way from before. Is we'll develop guys, bring them in, and supplement with free agents, and so I think Chaim Bloom coming in is really going to be huge. I am not your typical Cardinals fan where I'm going to just bash Mozeliak and everything, but it's time. It's time. It's time for him to move on and get something fresh in there. So. I'm pretty excited about the future under Bloom. So,
yeah, I think I tried to follow the individual nuances of front office dynamics and stuff in the NL Central, and try to figure out like who's doing what very little. Obviously, to me, in the last maybe 5 to 7 years, the gold standard has been the Brewers. They've done so much
for sure.
Very little. They continue to compete, or absolutely just blow the Pacoda ratings out of the water with and a lot of people tied that to Craig Counsell, which obviously there was a lot of excitement when the Cubs hired Craig Counsell for that reason. I have this bias of Craig Counsell's intangibles and the things he's going to bring to the Cubs might take more time than the immediate win-loss addition of what a manager can do. He's had his fingers in a lot of different things, and maybe he helped establish systems that work better for the Brewers. And these things just don't. Rome wasn't built in a day. Things can't just fall apart in a minute. So my hope is that the Craig Counsell effect. But I do see the same thing for Chaim Bloom of that's going to be something that I'm going to be watching carefully as the Cardinals transition to the next phase of what they are. He's going to be a really big part of that, and I think he's going to be much more comfortable in a market like St. Louis than the expectations and the weird dynamics he had to manage in Boston, which for sure. I feel like he ended up being a scapegoat a little bit.
I agree. Yeah, I think he got some stuff thrown on him that maybe wasn't all on him. So
correct. And so moving on to the Cardinals opening day roster, if you just want to kind of give us a preview of around the horn, what the starters are going to be for each position. And just give us an idea of, who's the player on that list that you're most excited for, least excited for, so we get an idea of what the Cardinals are going to look like on the field in 2025.
Yeah, sure. So we can start over at third base. The mainstay, Nolan Arenado, is still there, regardless of how hard they tried to trade him and get him to waive that non-trade clause as of opening day. I think he's still going to be there.
I guess as Cub fans, we should thank him for blocking that trade to Houston, which opened the door for the Cubs to get Kyle Tucker. That is a big part of our offseason. The hope is that we use that trade to extend him instead of just sit here on him, but that's a completely different episode and point.
Yeah, I look at that. That's ironic that you say that. I look at that trade and I'm thinking, oh, man, how nice would Cam Smith look in a Cardinals uniform? But I don't think the Cubs would have traded Cam Smith for Arenado. He's not worth that. But you got Nolan Arenado over at third, Mason Lynn, shortstop. I like him a lot. I think you're just starting to see the growth with him. I think he's potentially going to just take off. Second base, it just depends on where they go with this. I think, on Fangraphs and stuff, they have Donovan penciled in. I think the Cardinals really want to see what they have left in Nolan Gorman. It's going to be interesting to see what they do at second base. I think defensively, they're a lot better off with Donovan at second base, probably even offensively, honestly. But I think they really need to see what they have with Gorman and what better way to do it than give him a run this year, right? We're not going to challenge for a division title likely. So then over at first base, a name that you are probably quite familiar with, Wilson Contreras. He's coming out from behind the plate. I think that's going to do wonders for his health, and you may even see his bat take off, not having to have the rigors of catching and worrying about game planning for an offense. I think he can just focus on hitting and playing first base. Out in left field, again, it's going to kind of depend on how things roll, but either Lars Nootbaar or that's another possible playing spot for Brendan Donovan, potentially out in left. Center field could be Nootbaar. It just depends on how they work things out. I think the Cardinals really want Victor Scott to win that that spot out there in center field, and he's done really good in spring. So I think there's a chance that Victor Scott ends up in center field, breaking camp, and then that would push Nootbaar over to left. Right field is going to be Jordan Walker. Again, need to see what we got there. Give him a run. Quit bouncing him back and forth. There's really not much AAA pitching that he needs to see. He needs to make the adjustments at the major league level. So you got him, and then catcher. It looks like there's going to kind of be an even split with Ivan Herrera and Pedro Pajes behind the plate. And at DH, I think you're going to kind of see that who gets an off day thing. So you're going to see Burleson in there probably quite regularly. Donovan probably will slip into the DH role. Lucan Baker, a guy that's played some first base for the Cardinals. I could see him getting some DH role as well. But I think that's going to kind of be what you're going to see in the offense, at least starting out. Now, it wouldn't shock me to see Arenado moved at some point because obviously they're trying, which would definitely change things. But I think you start out the regular season with him penciled in at third every day and rolling forward from there. So,
yeah, I think it's interesting. There was some scuttlebutt for a number of years of the Cubs like trying to go after Nolan Arenado, and obviously, the Cardinals got him, and I feel like the Cardinals have done a really good job in a number of different off seasons of really pulling off some pretty aggressive and great trades and not really giving up a ton. Or like in hindsight, like the Paul Goldschmidt trade, worked for them, and moving Carson Kelly. They really only got rid of Austin Gomber and some other things to get Nolan Arenado. And like he's unfortunately there's some signs of aging and wear and tear, and that's just part of baseball. But when I look at this lineup, I do see like a lot of youth, and that's I think that obviously they're gonna let the kids play, as they would say, as they kind of sort out what they have. And I think this is kind of a perfect transition to discussing the rotation, if you want to give us kind of an idea of who's going to be the five in there. But I think this is probably where I see, from an outsider's perspective, a potential weakness. This is where there's a lot of age. If the team is old, it's old in the rotation. Give us an idea of like what the rotation is, and the top three bullpen arms that are really going to kind of anchor the St. Louis Cardinals pen in 2025.
Yeah, sure. So if the offense gives us some youth, the starting pitching is going to go the opposite direction, right? Because it's interesting. So you got Sonny Gray, will probably headline. He'll be the de facto ace. Spring has not been kind to him. A lot of times you can't put a lot of stock in those spring numbers. Sometimes they're more working on different pitches, working on their feel. So I don't put a whole lot of stock in the spring numbers, but Gray is definitely aging. Eric Fetty, I actually like him. I think he's a pretty decent pitcher. Came over, spent some time in Japan, and we got him at the trade deadline last year. He's been a hot name in trade speculation as well. So if he comes out of the gate hot, he may be somebody they move later down the road. Miles Michaelis eats innings. That's about it. Steven Matz probably is better suited for the bullpen, but they're going to keep running him out there as a starter, due to some salary things, and innings got to come from somewhere. And then kind of battling for that fifth spot has been where our youth comes in. Andre Palante and Michael McGreevy have kind of been the two battling for that fifth spot in the spring. But I did see something come out of Cardinals camp the other day that they're considering rolling out a 6-man rotation. So if they do that, then you're probably looking at Palante and McGreevy both being in there, and getting that youth movement started in the rotation until a few of those minor league names can get a little more seasoning and come on up to that rotation. But that's kind of the way the rotation looks, I think, in my opinion. Again, mid-season, a couple of those names may not be there anymore. But I think that's the way they roll it out. The bullpen, Helsley is going to anchor the back end of that. Hells Bells is going to still be there. Again, hot trade name. So mid-season, who knows? But your main setup guys are Ryan Fernandez from the right side, JoJo Romero from the left side. Decently young guys, live arms. Really like both of them. I could see Fernandez stepping into that closer role if Helsley does get moved potentially. And then kind of more your middle relief type. You're looking at Matthew Liberatore, Gordon Grachefo, another couple of young names there that I think you'll see pretty heavily used in the bullpen this year. So yeah, I think that's kind of how it. The bullpen I actually like. I think we're setting up a pretty nice bullpen. The rotation, it's going to be rough. So
yeah, I would agree. That's they really haven't slid back in bullpen quality, and Hell's Bells is pretty great at the end of the game. He throws really hard, and he'll be, if he has a good year, he'll be a really coveted piece at the deadline for a team like probably the Dodgers, because it's always the Dodgers. But I think it's interesting. Looking at this rotation, I think as an outsider, as a Cubs fan, I think that's what's going to make or break the win projections of this team, and just looking at if some of these guys, especially some of the other guys, have good years, they're not going to finish the year on the team because they're going to get traded. And if they have really good years, they're potentially competing, but then it gets messy on what they're trying to build. It's an interesting time, for your perspective. The next thing that we usually discuss, in these previews is, on the usually this is weirdly framed in the way of the Cubs are winning this division, but I'm trying to rephrase the question. But if the Cardinals were to compete in the division, what is the strength of this team? What is the thing that you see that could carry them to winning the NL Central in 2025?
For the Cardinals to win the division, about everything's going to have to go right. You're going to have Jordan Walker's going to have to hit, Newt Barr's going to have to hit and stay healthy. Wynn's going to have to take that next step up there at short, offensively anyways. And that rotation is going to have to pitch above its head basically all year, I think, for them to be in it midway, right? As far as what a strength they have, their infield defense with Nolan Arenado over at third and Wynn at short is, if you're a pitcher, keep the ball on the ground, because those guys, our infield defense should be outstanding. Typically a catcher can transition defensively pretty good to first base. So I don't look at Contreras being a huge drop-off defensively from Goldschmidt. So I honestly think defensively the Cardinals' infield is going to be very, very solid. Potentially if Victor Scott does take over center field and Newt Barr's in left, those two guys can really cover some ground in the outfield and cover for some of Jordan Walker's defensive liabilities. So I think defense could be a strength of theirs. I think they're going to get on base at a high clip. You've got some OBP guys on this roster, especially if Donovan's getting regular playing time, and I think Mason Wynn, is going to get on base, and so I think they're going to get on base. I worry about how we're going to drive them in consistently. But if you're asking for strengths, I think infield defense for sure, outfield defense to a degree, and I think they're going to get on base at a decent clip. So I think that's our strengths. Does that translate to winning a division? Not likely, but those are the strengths they have. So
I think we've kind of already talked about when we talked about the pitching, but if things are not going well in 2025, is it the pitching that sinks the team?
For sure. Yeah. The other things that could go wrong, obviously, would be the inverse of what I just said on the offensive side. If Jordan Walker can't figure out major league pitching, if Lars Nootbaar can't stay healthy, if Mason Wynn doesn't take that next step up offensively, if they do decide to roll with Nolan Gorman all year and he continues to strike out at a 30% rate, the offense is going to look anemic fast. So definitely, I think the pitching is going to be a weakness no matter what, unless they just perform way above their heads. But there's a potential for enough other things to go wrong that it could be ugly if enough other things go wrong with that pitching. So, yeah.
So I like to ask this question from time to time, just for Cub fans to get an outsider's perspective. Like you've seen, obviously, the Cubs roster as a Cardinals fan. You probably look at other teams. If you had to say the strength of the 2025 Chicago Cubs was what, and the weakness of the 2025 Cubs was what would your answers be?
Their offense looks awful tough if everybody's going. They look nice on the offensive side. Obviously, Kyle Tucker changes things a lot. A healthy year from Seiya Suzuki changes things a lot. If Pete Crow Armstrong can make that next step up offensively and wreak havoc on the base paths, that changes things a lot. So I love what the Cubs are doing offensively. Really, really, really like it. I am maybe still on the Jacob Amaya bandwagon, or not Jacob Amaya, Miguel Amaya, your catcher.
Yes.
I still think that there's maybe some life left in there, but if not, you've got a pretty good guy in the minor leagues just waiting to come up and start crushing the ball. So I love the offense that you guys run out there. Weaknesses, I mean, it would be nice, and I think we talked about this a little bit off air, it would really be nice to see another name at the top of that rotation. Not that Imanaga and Steele are not great, because I would take both of those on my team any day of the week. But imagine if they had gone out this offseason and swung a trade to bring Snell in, or, if they had signed Burns. Imagine what one of those two at the top of your rotation and bumping those other two down like you talked about. Goodness gracious. I mean, you're talking competing with the Dodgers, honestly, with the starting rotation. So that would be the only weakness if I see to put you to the next level, maybe, right? The back end of the bullpen, I think there's maybe still some questions there, like who for sure is going to be at that back end of the bullpen. So that there's a lot of options there. Love Porter Hodge. There's a lot of options there for you guys to go for, but by mid-season, you kind of want to see how that's going to shake out and be a little more stabilized, I think. But you talk about having Cardinals envy for several years. I've got Cubs envy right now because you guys, it's the Brewers and you guys in that division. You guys are the class of the division, and I like what the Cubs are doing better. So,
yeah, I appreciate hearing that. I think sometimes I was just talking to Cole Wright over at Marquee for our Cubs preview episode about. You get lost in the forest when you're looking at your team constantly.
For sure.
You can see like all the flaws. So, hearing other folks' perspective from the outside of like, hey, this is the things they're doing well. Because like offensively, I'm definitely concerned because I think there's pieces that, like PCA, I'd like to see take another level. Like I would have liked Matt Shaw to have really earned a spot in the team because we had gotten a better third baseman or a solid third baseman. I would have preferred one more solid bat in the lineup because as much as I do like Kyle Tucker and say I thought that the Cubs, when they had Bellinger, needed Bellinger and it kind of seems like we swapped Bellinger and Tucker, which is still an improvement, but like you need Dansby Swanson to be a bigger part. You need Ian Happ to be very consistent. And then the bottom of that lineup of Shaw, Amaya, PCA is a little bit of a dice roll at the moment of like what they are going to be. And it really, really changes the dynamic of the group. And yeah, it hasn't been, the best 24 hours for Cub fans as we've watched the best team on paper, like show why they're the best team on paper in the first 2 games of the season. But yeah, it's that opening day, like information bias of right now I have to sit here and wait for my team to win because we played 2 games way earlier versus a team that is really, really good. And it's not really a fair bar on March 18th versus, I think, and I agree the pitching staff thing, as we talked about off air, like when the Cubs did not bring back Kyle Hendricks, I thought the intention was this, they were going to shift down the rotation enough that he would be obsolete, but replacing that with Colin Ray and Matthew Boyd doesn't really provide this confidence that that's what really affected. And when there's been all this financial discussion, spending $14-15 million on those 2 players annually, when Kyle Hendricks took $2 million and has looked pretty good this spring, obviously, like spring and things, like they're very different. But yeah, if you're pinching pennies, if you could have kept Kyle Hendricks and that would have left some money to go get Corbin Burns or something like that, then we're having a different conversation about the rotation entirely. So, but yeah, it's always nice to get that outside perspective. So the last thing that I'm going to ask, we do this for all our team previews. Take a look at an unnamed, no free ads sports betting book to get what the over-under is for wins. And I'll let you start. The line set by this no free ad sports book is saying that the line is 75.5 for the Cardinals. Do you think they're over or under that number?
If it were me, I'm going to go the underside of that because I think what these like Pacoda and even Fangraphs and some of these set the lines. What their models are not able to take into account is those end season moves, right?
Yes, yeah.
And so if Arenado starts off hot and Helsley's got 20 saves by the All-Star break and some of these other things, and they're getting closer to that 75.5 number, then likely those guys' trade value has gone up, so they're heading out the door. And then once you do that, you're probably bringing in younger players, and it's going to bring you back down below that level. So that's what that would be my take on that, is that we're going to come in below that. If everything breaks right, yeah, they may win 75, 77 games. But again, that's going to have to take everything breaking right. And probably not making some of those midseason moves, moving out the Arenado, the Helsley, the Eric Fetty, guys like that. So, but I think realistically we come in below that 75 win mark. So,
yeah, I think I'm struggling with saying under, but I am at the same place that you are. I try to take into account like mid-season acquisitions. If a team, like what their farm system looks like and whether or not they're able to acquire someone, or if they're needing to move somebody to kind of move their organization in a different direction. And yeah, I think if they're going over 75.5, I don't think things are going according to plan. It will be a nice surprise for the organization, but I feel like they would much prefer to be under that number to, really move the needle on what they're trying to do. So I, for your sake, as a kind Cubs fan, I'm going to select the under, so that you guys are moving the direction you want to go. But exactly what you said, like if you're getting good years out of Sonny Gray, Nolan Arenado, Helsley, you're going to want these guys moved so that you can really jumpstart like the next range of the minor league system. And like the other thing is like there will be struggles, but like finding out what the kids are, like Victor Scott and Jordan Walker, and figuring out if he's something, because a lot of these guys are still very young. But yeah, I think that if they're trending towards the 75.5, there might be some early aggression to make sure that they trend backwards. And and I think not to give away if people haven't listened to it already, but it's why I picked the over for the Cubs, because I think there are a few teams in this division that are probably going to offload, and the Cubs do have like a lot of, I think, back end NL Central competition in the season, and these are going to be teams that are in a completely different spot than what the Cubs are trying to be. So that might inflate their win total to be a little bit more than it should be. But yeah, I'm also gonna go with the under. But that being said, and not to leave on a super negative note, I know you work with Prospects 1500. Do you, before we let you go, give people a plug of where they can find you on social media, where they can find your work for Prospects 1500, and plug anything you might be working on that's coming out soon?
Yeah, sure. So over at Prospects 1500, if you're on more of the Dynasty Baseball League side of things, that's kind of what our resource is. Scott, our president, also puts kind of a focus on the hobby side of things, so like baseball card trading and stuff like that. So there's some people who do some baseball card things, but yeah, we're definitely a lot more focused over at Prospects 1500, obviously on the minor leagues, and on helping you improve your dynasty baseball team with the future in mind, right? So that's kind of what we do. I contribute on the St. Louis Cardinals, and on their midseason or their preseason rankings. All of our preseason rankings came out. We ranked 50 teams for each organization. So if you want to jump over at prospects1500.com and check some of that out, it's kind of neat to see. We do a collaborative process. So we get like 5 or 6 different of us guys, and we all put our ranks in there, and it kind of comes out with an aggregate ranking. So, I may value prospects one way, but somebody else values prospects slightly differently. So it kind of skews those numbers and kind of gets you more of a balance instead of, for the Cubs, I love Kevin Alcantara, right? But somebody else may love Matt Shaw so much that he, it kind of outweighs some of that. So anyways, it just kind of gives you that balance. But yeah, and we do some, prospects of the week. I'm working on some monthly articles for them that we're going to put out to kind of who's hot, who's not in the minor leagues. One of our other writers, Michael Kelly, just finished up a big 4-part series on rebuilding a dynasty team that he put together. So that's kind of an interesting read if that's something you're interested in. But yeah, that's kind of what we do over there at Prospects 1500. So.
Awesome. Well, Jeremy, thank you so much for coming on Bricks Behind the Ivy. Thank you, everybody, for listening. This has been another episode of our NL Central preview for 2025 featuring the St. Louis Cardinals. You can find Jeremy on social networks and at Prospects 1500. Make sure you're hitting that subscribe button. If you're listening to this, subscribe, review. If you're listening or watching on YouTube, make sure you're commenting and let us know your thoughts if you think the Cardinals are going to be over or under that 75.5. But thank you so much for listening, and just once in my life I'll say go Cardinals for your sake, and also go Cubs. Thank you so much. Have a good day.
Hey man, thank you.